In this lesson, I'll show some common modeling techniques I use on buildings. I'll work in Maya, and the first thing I'm going to do is set my units to inches. I'll press spacebar for the hotbox and choose Window, Settings, Preferences, Preferences. Under Settings, I'll put the linear units in inches. I'm going to make a column, and rather than do a building column as simply a cylinder, which gets kind of plain and boring, I'd like to add a little extra detail to it. This is going to be kind of a modernist column with a recessed base, a straight shaft, and a reveal at the top. I'll start out with a poly cylinder, holding Shift and right-clicking to access the Modeling Creation marking menu. I'll draw the cylinder, and I'll place it at 0, 0. I like to start my objects at 0, 0 so that I can find them easily and they don't fly off the screen if I spin around with nothing selected. I'll make this cylinder a radius of 11 and a height of 6 with 24 sides and one subdivision on the height. I'll put the Y height of this at 3. That way it sits flat on the floor. Unless my floor needs to vary, I like to make the floor at 0. That way things made at 0 sit on the floor with no gaps. Now I'll take out the top and bottom. I'll press F9 for vertex and select the top and bottom vertices by windowing around them. Then I'll press Ctrl F11 to convert that selection to faces. And then hit Delete. It's a quick way to get the top and bottom off a cylinder. Now I'm going to make the shaft of a column. I'll hold Shift and right-click again and draw a poly cylinder. I'll align it after I make it, so I just want to get the size right. What I'm figuring is that this is going to be part of maybe a lobby of an education center, or a large room with round columns in front of windows. I'll give this one a radius of 12 and a height of 137. Here's where that number comes from. Oh, and here's 24 subdivisions on the axis as well. 137 inches. The base is 6 inches tall. Plus 137 is 143, and one more inch at the top for the reveal gives me an even 12 feet. Good height for my lobby. You can vary it to any size you want. The key is to model in real-world scale. Now I'm ready to get these aligned. With the cylinder selected, I'll hold Shift and select the column base. Then on my hotbox, I'll choose Modify, Align Tool. In the Align tool, I'll center these on one axis, on the second axis, and finally, in more of a side view, I'll snap them top to bottom. In the Align tool, as you can see here, the solid rectangle represents what you are aligning to. The open rectangle represents the objects being aligned. And as I click and hold on this one, you can see the yellow arrow showing where the top cylinder will come down to. Now they're perfectly snapped together and light tight. I need to make my reveal at the top. I'll pick the bottom cylinder, press Ctrl D to duplicate, and I'm still actually in the Align tool. I'll hold Shift and select the column shaft and snap them top to bottom. Now I'll press F10 for edge, W for move, and double-click on the edge loop that's the top of that reveal piece. On my menu line input, I'll switch over to Relative Transform and put in a negative Y of 5. Now my reveal is 1 inch tall, and this column assembly is 12 feet from base all the way up. It's ready for naming and duplication, and I'm on to Windows. To make the windows, I'm going to set my two columns in place and line up polycubes as my window framing. I'll start out with the column, press Ctrl D to duplicate, and move this column 240 inches on the X, or 20 feet. Pressing F to focus shows me both columns. Now I'll switch over to the front view using the hotbox again. One of the things I do in Maya when I'm modeling is turn off the grid once I've placed my objects. That makes it a little easier to see. What I'll start out with then are polycubes. The first ones I'm going to make are tall vertical elements that will go centered on the columns. The way I'll start this is holding V for snap, and start the box outside the column, click and drag over and land, again, outside the column, not down on the base, and this box is centered perfectly on it. I can tell because on the inputs for the polycube the width is 24, the same as my column. The height I'm going to make 10, and the depth will come up to 144. That way it's the right height. I'll put the translate y of this at 72, half of 144. Now finally I'll take the width down to, 6 sounds pretty good, and it's centered on the column. There's always a number of ways to do things. One of the things I was looking at there is that I was snapping the object centered on the other, and the center of objects in Maya is always in the center. That way I know where the floor is at 0, how tall it is, and I can put the translate y at 72 and have it be perfectly on the floor. There's my first frame. I'll space them out later. I'm going to duplicate that frame, Control D, and move it again, -240. So it lines up with the other one. Now temporarily I'll hide my columns so I can see a little better what's going on, selecting them and pressing Control H for hide. In my front view then, I'm ready to add my window framing. I'll hold Shift and right click and choose another polycube. I'll start this one out by holding V for snap inside the frame and V to snap again and drag up for the height. This will be one of my top framing pieces. I'll leave the width at 234 and make the height 8. I'll put the depth at 4 inches, and again I'll use my Align tool. Hotbox, Modify, Align. Select it, duplicate it, hold Shift and select the post again, and align to the bottom. One of the things I do when I'm modeling is actually stay in the Align tool when I'm cloning and aligning objects. The Align tool is also available using G for repeat last. Now I'll add in some window framing in the middle. I'll press Shift and right click again, make a polycube, and snap this one inside. Rather than make just a straight grid, I'd like to have these have sort of a Mondrian kind of look with staggered window framing. I'll put the height of this at 6. I'll leave the depth at 136, and I'll change the width to 4. Now I'll slide this over, duplicate it, and slide the copy over again. Duplicate one more time, and space them out a little different. I'll repeat the process with my side mullions as well. I'll hold Shift and right click, make a polycube, and snap it between them. In this case, I'm going to leave the width alone. I'll make the height 4 and the depth 2. So they get thinner progressively as the windows get smaller. I'll take this piece, duplicate it around, and repeat with the other parts. I'll finish this and show what it looks like when I'm done. My window assembly is ready for aligning. I'll pick all the objects and just make sure that one of the posts is selected last. Now on my hotbox I'll choose Modify and Align tool again. I'll align these on their centers. All the objects will snap together centered, and I get this really neat hierarchy of pieces. I'm ready to do a little cleanup here. In my front view, I need to take out all of the little end polygons of all the intermediate pieces. I'll do them a few at a time. Selecting some, hitting F11 for face or polygon. I can pick everybody, all the polygons on those elements, and hold Control to deselect all the long pieces. Then Delete takes out the ends. I'll repeat this process and clean up the object. The objects are all cleaned up of extra polygons. Now I'm going to take all of the window frames except for one of the posts and combine them. Under Mesh, Combine. Finally, what I'll do is delete the history. I can either choose Edit, Delete by Type, History, or press Shift-Alt-D. This is a window frame unit ready for cloning. I've got this in my column to make the rest of my lobby. When I model architecture, I want it to be clean, to scale, and light tight. This will help immensely later in lighting and compositing, so things work as they're supposed to the first time and light correctly.